You know, when I look back and I think about meeting people like Mike Arrington and Nick Zenstrom, founder of Stripe, you know, I think I'm finally cool. I got like 100 messages backstage. Are you there with Paige? So moving right on. And this piece is called Show, Don't Tell, Reinventing Your Image. It's 2018, and as you all know, we live in a visual world. Backstage right now, we have one of the biggest names at the forefront of visual media and design. Here to discuss how we can let your product speak for itself in conversation with Eric Schurenberg of Mansueto Ventures. Please welcome to the stage host of podcast Design Matters, Debbie Millman. Thank you.
Well, Debbie, you packed them in.
I think it's all you.
Yeah, no, I kind of have my doubts. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Debbie Millman, if you were to build a statue at the intersection of branding and innovation and design, that statue would be a statue of Debbie. That just to kind of cover a little bit of the bio, 20 years as president of Sterling Brands, engineering the sale of it finally in 2008, was it, to Omnicom? Writer of 6 books on branding and design, co-founder of the only graduate program on branding at the School of Visual Arts, and the creator of Design Matters, which is not only one of the first podcasts ever and best loved podcasts ever, let alone the best loved and first podcast on design. So we are about to learn quite a bit here at the hands of our guest. So Debbie, welcome.
Thank you, Eric. And for those that might not be aware of Eric's very, very fine resume, he is the CEO and editor-in-chief of Fast Company and Inc. magazine. So just so people know about you as well.
Well, thanks, Debbie. Actually, Debbie supports Fast Company incredibly well. And in return, we couldn't help but name you one of the most creative people in business. That is.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this gift you have for design, for explaining design, for evangelizing it, is this something that you've always loved? Has it been a childhood love, or did you try a lot of other things and then come to it and decide, realize this is it?
Actually, I came to it quite by accident. I always like to make things, and as I've gotten older, I realize that I'm happiest when I'm actually making things. But I thought that I would be more of a journalist. And when I was in college, I worked for my student newspaper, the Albany Student Press, the acronym of which was the ASP. And what I found when I became, in my senior year of college, I became the editor of this arts and features section that they had. And I sort of fancied it, the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. But what I very quickly found out was that I was much more interested in the design than I was of the writing. So I would assign articles and they'd come in really long, and I'd keep them really long even when they could be cut in order to have more pages to design bigger and better spreads. And that was my entry into design quite by accident. When I graduated, it was the only marketable skill that I had, doing old school, old-fashioned layout and paste up. And so my first job was working at a cable magazine. In the 80s, cable was all the rage.
Yes.
And I got my very first job making $6 an hour doing old school layout and paste up. It was the only thing that I could do. I have a degree in English literature with a minor in Russian literature. And so I often joke that I actually have a college degree in reading.
Okay, good. Well, it's a straight shot there to the position you're in. Actually, that's a great story. As a longtime magazine editor, I'm always thrilled by stories about journalists who go on to get honest jobs. Considering the group of people we're talking to here, let's talk about branding.
Okay.
You have consulted for startups as well as some of the most famous companies in the world, but focusing on startups, what are the questions that you need to ask yourself, or that you would ask as a consultant, that would turn a new product or service into a brand?
Most companies, and I would say most organizations, when they start out, aren't really thinking about the future. They're just trying to make it. They're just trying to have something that's going to be successful, or as successful as possible, as quickly as possible. And one of the biggest jobs that I've had over the years in branding is helping organizations understand that even when they're a startup, they have to plan a roadmap for growth. Where do they want to be? Most organizations don't think about brand architecture. They don't think about product development in terms of what could happen 3, 5, 10 years out. They think about what can we do right now just to survive. And that's an important question, obviously.
Right.
But if you don't think about where you want to go next, you often end up going where this path of least resistance. What can we do that's easiest? Or what can we do that's quick to market? Or what can we do just to be able to pay the bills? You have to be thinking about the high altitude view of where you want to be going, even if it seems extreme, even if it seems unattainable, even if it seems delusional. Because this way, at least you can start to plan the various scenarios and start to think about what your brand architecture and what your long-term goals will be.
Can you give us an example of a company that you've seen that's done that very well?
A company that I've seen do it really well, I mean, I guess the easiest, quickest answer that comes to mind is Amazon. Because Amazon started really as a distributor of books, and now they sell everything. If they had only concentrated on selling books, that's all they'd be selling.
Yes.
And so it's really, really important for an organization to think about not just who they are and what they want to be right now, but who they are and what they want to be in the future. So this way it's deliberate. I define branding as deliberate differentiation. Deliberate differentiation. Lots of people have lots of really convoluted definitions. When I wrote Brand Thinking and Other Noble Pursuits, I interviewed 20 of the world's greatest thinkers about brand. And I asked them all, how do you define brand? How do you define branding? And I got 20 different definitions. Not that any of them are right or any of them are more right or more wrong, but they were all really sophisticated. And I wanted to break it down. What is the simplest, easiest way to determine what branding is? Branding is deliberate differentiation. You determine what your construct is, what your deliverable is, what your product is, and you determine how that is going to be different from anyone else's. If you can't answer that question, how is your specific thing different from all of the competitors, from the entire landscape of brands around you? If you can't answer that, then you shouldn't be in business. So the most important thing is to be able to determine what is uniquely yours, what is uniquely part of your DNA that no one else can copy. So Amazon was able to determine what they were going to be that day, but also what they want. They had a vision for the future. Branding is a journey that you take that results in an impression in the market. But it's something that is developed over time. It's not something that is developed overnight. And the longer that you can plan out, the more control you have over where you're going to end up.
One of the most famous titles, cover lines, in Fast Company's history was "The Brand Called You."
Yes, Tom Peters.
Now, does your theory of deliberate differentiation apply to personal branding? And can you think of the brand called Debbie Millman? And what was the thought process that made that so successful?
So I have very provocative thoughts on personal branding.
Share them.
I actually believe that people should not aspire to be brands.
Why not?
Brands are a construct. We imbue meaning on a brand. A brand is created in the mind. We then determine what that is. The brand maker creates something. It's a construct. They name it. They create a logo. They create an identity all around. They create a visual language. The success of that brand is based on everyone else agreeing on what that construct is.
Right.
We have manufactured meaning, and then we agree on what that meaning is. It's sort of meta, and it's sort of amazing, and we're the only species on the planet that does this. We manufacture meaning, and then we agree on what that manufactured meaning means. Humans are ever evolving. They're messy, they're complex. Some days they're happy, some days they're sad, some days they're joyous, some days they're in love, some days they're in hate. We have myriad experiences. As brands, we would be failures. We're inconsistent. We have different quality days. The promise of the experience, who knows? If people want to aspire to be brands, they're aspiring to be manufactured constructs. People in all their glory are the opposite of brands. They should be the opposite of brands. So I would hate to think that this person or any person is a manufactured construct, because then you're sort of stuck and imprisoned in that manufactured construct. We want to be the opposite of that, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. In fact, it does, when you describe it that way, it does sound like a prison to try to live like that. Let me talk about design and technology, or rather ask you to talk about design and technology. Technology is at a kind of inflection point in its popular persona. It's no longer seen necessarily as an unquestioned good. Addictive screens, addictive games, planned obsolescence, waste. To what extent are designers responsible for bending the arc on that and bringing it back to a more benign place?
I don't know that we'll ever get back to a benign place. I actually think that we're not really addicted to the devices. We might think we're addicted to the devices. We hold them, we caress them, we sleep with them, and so forth. What I think we're really addicted to is the feeling that we get through the device. The feeling of being wanted, of being needed, of being followed, of being liked. All of those feelings are things that are achieved through the device. I think we're addicted to those feelings. We're addicted to that constant dopamine hit that we get when we get some sort of feedback through the device. But the device is nothing without those experiences that come through it. And that's what I think is the challenge. Because what we once craved person to person in real life, we now crave in the device. But in terms of branding, I believe that we're at an inflection point. If you think back over the last 10,000 years, the world's first manufactured constructs, now whether they be from up on high down or whether they be created in our own minds, but our first manufactured constructs were religious symbols. We created religious symbols depending on what our beliefs were regarding this higher power. About 10,000 years ago, we started to do that.
Right.
And then we agreed on what that meaning was. And then we often fought and still fight about what those meanings are, which is more valid, which is more significant, which is more powerful. Fast forward 10,000 years to now. In this time, in this 10,000 year span, we went from creating these constructs to represent our beliefs to brand essentially meaning ownership on cattle. That was appropriated from the word brawn, from the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, where that word first shows up. It means to literally mark or destroy by fire. It was then appropriated by the corporation. And in the time from our creating these religious symbols to the appropriation by the corporation, brands were essentially owned, distributed, manufactured, marketed, promoted through the corporation. So it was an extremely top-down equation. Corporations created the brands, distributed the brands, promoted the brands, the consumer bought the brand. In the last 2 years, maybe 3, that equation has flipped. And branding has become democratized. We don't fully yet appreciate the power that we as consumers now have. But that equation has flipped. Branding has become democratized, and the biggest brands in the world now are being made by the people, for the people. What was the ownership and the purview of the corporation had the shareholder value that they had to provide. They had to provide a return on an investment. Stakeholders had to be happy. Now, the cultural currency, the hashtag, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Time's Up, all of these are constructs that we've manufactured to signify some belief. That belief is a movement now, as opposed to a profit center that is provoking change. And these brands are all being made by people, for people. They're not being bought and sold. They're being magnified to signify the changes that we're demanding in our culture. And that's why I feel somewhat hopeful about the role that branding now has. It has become, and can continue to be, if we really harness the power, a profound manifestation of the human spirit in the most significant way. We haven't seen this kind of shift and power that brand has in 10,000 years until now, again. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty profound, Debbie. I mean, to draw back to a tactical level, I kind of hate to do that after
That's okay.
after you've got. I would imagine that you're the only speaker at Startup University at Web Summit that uses references to Beowulf to make a point about technology. But let's say that you are that you're a startup. You want to create a movement around the business that you have.
Yes.
What are the mistakes? What are the falsehoods that drive people in the wrong direction? And what should you stay away from?
Well, I think it's important to understand that people are no longer really interested in a different form or a different flavor or a different bottle shape. What they're really interested in is, how can this brand make a difference in my life? People, while they might crave a really big flat screen TV, we metabolize our purchases really, really quickly. And what might seem to be shiny and alluring and exciting when you first get it, and that's that sort of obsolescence, fades as the new options sort of come upon the horizon. So what people are really interested, people are happiest, humans are happiest when our brains are harmoniously resonating with others. And so if there's a way to foster connectivity through your brand so that people feel like they are connecting. So that's what we're searching for in this addiction to that feeling in our devices. It's really a feeling of mattering, of connecting, of people seeing us or liking us or following us. That's what we're really addicted to. So if we can foster some sense of genuine connectivity through a startup, through a new brand, that has much higher likelihood of succeeding. So the brands that are succeeding now, things like WeWork, The Wing, Airbnb, things that are bringing people closer together. More and more people now are living alone. People are living in cities and they're living alone. 1 in 10 households in 1950 were single people living alone. Yeah. Now it's less than 1 in 3. And what's even more interesting about that statistic is the kind of person. In the 1950s, that single person living alone was a misfit, a spinster. Now, it's something we aspire to. It's a rite of passage. We're going to have our own apartments before we go off and then start our families. So the more a brand can foster connectivity, that limbic part of the brain that desires, that demands feeling loved, the more likely they are to succeed.
Good, good. Well, that sounds like not just a recipe for success, but a recipe for actually making your business a force for good, for unifying people.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good place to leave it, Debbie. Let us all leave here resolved to make our business a force for good. Debbie Millman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.